want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hi, folks. It's Rick Wilson. Welcome back to the Enemies List. I have a very special guest today. It's Fred Trump. And Fred Trump has told a story from inside the Trump family that I think everyone needs to read. The book is called All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way. It is not like any other book I think you've probably read about Donald Trump and his family in the last few years. It's a much more internal and honestly kind of painful story. And I'm delighted to have you with us today, Fred. Thank you so much for coming on the program. And I want to ask folks, because not everybody knows you as as a player in the Trump family orbit, and you're somebody who did not move to Washington with Jared and Ivanka or play this role that Eric and Don Jr. played in the family. And a lot of that through line in your story is this distance from your uncle. So tell us your story and how you got to the point where you wrote this book, because I think it's important people understand what you've gone through and experienced as a Trump, to understand the context, a lot of who he is and who the family that your grandfather Fred Trump and Donald Trump have created.
Right. No, I appreciate the question and thank you very much for having me. It was by design that I stay quiet all these years. I had always wanted to start my own career. No help. I did not want to join the family company. I am married for 35 years, have 3 great kids, happy to have been quiet throughout the decades.
Right.
That being said, still having a good relationship with Donald and my cousins. But I am truly one of the only people that was there during Donald's formative years, through his business career, through his political career in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the reason why the book comes out the way it is these are from memories. These are stories that are told that are truthful. I was there. They're not researched. They're not journalistic.
Right.
And it's not a hit piece. It is a 3-dimensional look at Donald and the family, good, the bad, and the jaw-dropping.
That to me was something that I really noted when I was reading the book, because a lot of people think this is going to be some lurid tell-all, but honestly, it was more. I'm just going to say that maybe, and you can correct me if you think this is wrong. It seemed more melancholy in a lot of ways than tell-all. It seemed more like, this is the strange world of my family. This is the weird world of my family.
Yeah, imagine as a young kid, when I was a long time ago, having a father who was a very caring, charismatic guy who wanted nothing to do with the family business. He wanted to be an airline pilot. That was his dream. And my grandfather, who was very driven, incredibly driven, wouldn't accept that. And Dad took a swing at it, and it didn't work. They butted heads constantly. And Dad eventually did become an airline pilot, and he was living his dream. But Donald entered the picture and tried to, talk him. My parents were up in Marblehead at the time. My dad was stationed training up there. And Donald, who would have had a clear path to succeed my grandfather, proceeded to demean and belittle my father. Totally unnecessary. But that's the way he was then. And I witnessed that firsthand, even into my young adulthood or late teenage years.
Mhm.
always the comments. But of course, now my father is great in Donald's eyes.
Sure. Um, that history of your family. I mean, Fred, your grandfather, left an indelible sort of mark on the business character of your family, and Donald. I feel like Donald's, and I've written about this a lot. He kind of grew up in this New York world of Page Six, the gossipy kind of like idea of what he thought was glamour and effective marketing and all that stuff, and that's something that never really had a strong draw for you, did it? It was just you didn't want to be a part of that, like
Absolutely,
loud, crude, crass kind of thing. Um,
it
so
wasn't.
so but you maintained, cordial and good relations with your cousins and the rest of the extended Trump family. What's it like inside that family? I mean, I've always wondered, like, how much of the public facing behavior of Don Jr. and Eric sort of competing for daddy's affection, and Ivanka sort of orbiting in some like weird other relationship. What does the dynamic feel like inside the Trump family? Is this a close family, or is it all transactional and maneuvering? Is it succession basically?
Well, that's interesting. You bring up succession. Uh, Look, I have no doubt that my cousins love their father.
Sure.
I will also say that they are, in many ways, dependent on keeping that relationship. I think if
Oh yeah.
any one of them wanted to go out on their own, that would not be beneficial to them. So
Mm-hmm.
they circle the wagons, and everything is great, everything's the best, and that's the way it's going to be. I chose not to lead that path.
Right. So when Trump won the presidency, I know for a fact, I've talked to people close to him. I've talked to everybody in that campaign. Before the election, I was talking to all the senior people in the campaign who were like, "We're going to lose. This is crazy. I'm going to have some great stories. We'll go have a steak dinner. I'll tell you the craziest shit about Donald Trump." Right? He was shocked to win that race.
He
Couldn't
was.
believe it.
That's where we.
Right. Right. So, but it struck me that the Trump brand had migrated from the real estate brand to the sort of golf courses and TV.
Yeah.
Really, that was the winning the presidency was the one thing that sort of rebooted a lot of their ability to do the things they wanted to do with the company, right? I mean, the DC hotel became a place where foreign governments like brought dump trucks of money. Suddenly, they're getting deals in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and Jared Kushner is out, getting a $2 billion market cap for his investment fund from this from the Saudi wealth fund and all this. It really saved them, didn't it? The presidency sort of saved the Trump brand, for the family side of the brand, if you will.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up because there were conversations within the family, myself included, that this was really a branding opportunity for him.
Right.
The running for the president, I think, is what he wanted. I'm not sure that he, in fact, in the end, wanted to win, but he did. And
I've heard, by the way, I've heard that same exact assessment.
yeah,
That that the winning was a shock and not a good one.
a quick anecdote that you read is when I went down there the day that the New England Patriots were at the White House. I took my son Christopher, and he
Right.
wanted me to remind. I said in the book that Christopher was a New England Patriots fan. He's not. He's a Jet fan like I am. So I wanted to clear that with my son Christopher. And we went into the Oval Office to sit down with Donald and one of Christopher's friends, Keith Schiller, who was his bodyguard up in the city, who came down to Washington with him. Took some photos, and he tapped me on the shoulder. If you know Keith, Keith's about 8 feet tall.
Yeah.
He said, Fred, Donald really likes it when you come down here because you remind him of Queens and the old days, if you will. So I think it was a very lonely time for him for quite a while. As far as the branding and taking advantage, I've said this for so many years. He is a talented guy. My cousins are talented kids. Why couldn't they just do stuff above board? Why is there always an angle? Why is there always a scheme? I just don't get it.
Is that a sort of echo of your grandfather, of Fred, who sort of, is that something Donald learned from Fred, like, always go over the line, even if you're making money, staying out on the right side of it?
Yeah, I mean, I never looked at my grandfather that way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he was fully on board with the Democratic machine in Brooklyn and Queens,
Sure.
and we all know. I knew what it was like for that.
Yeah.
I don't remember people saying that my grandfather was a shyster or it's this or that. My grandfather kept a very low profile. I mean, he was the dominant builder in Brooklyn, and second to the Lefrak family in Queens.
Yep.
But he kept a low profile. Donald, who had his full backing, when he moved into Manhattan, that's when all bets were off.
Right. So there are some takeaways in this book about Donald that, and look, as one of the world's leading critics of Donald Trump, some of them I have to, he can be occasionally, to his family particularly, he can occasionally be kind, he can occasionally be generous, but he can also be kind of a dick and kind of cruel and unfeeling. And I want to get to the story of William next, but
Sure.
I this is a pattern that I think is something that people haven't fully internalized about the way he behaves towards people. It's sort of capricious, right? There's sort of like, you can't really predict whether you're going to get good Donald or bad Donald in some ways.
Yeah, and again, my early memories were always good. He was the first guy to take me playing golf, and that's a passion that we shared. We would bullshit all the time, and I was able to call him up anytime, and that was great. I think what's happening, or what has happened, is he's ramped up his base so much that they are almost driving him to go to the next level of craziness. And that's what I have seen, because he was not that way back in the business world. Now, he did his thing, and he was very loyal, the famous John Barron of New York Post days.
Right.
He once he got into DC, through his populism, if you will, and with the backing of a Republican Party that you and I don't recognize.
Not at all. Right.
He had to keep up with the train that he started down the rails.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation, because there is a part of him that just, once he became the character he's playing now, he never stopped playing that character.
Right.
And there is a certain dynamic about him as an entertainer, as a presenter, that people have fed him this affirmation that he wants, and it makes him want to do it more. It's like a conveyor belt where he's always going, trying to go faster and faster on the conveyor belt.
Yeah. If you don't mind, Rick, real quick, because this thought just came into my head. I remember one time I sat down with him a few years ago, and my business career was negatively impacted by, certainly when he was running for president, when he became president. I don't want to get into it. But I remember sitting down with him and saying, "Look, Donald, I just have to tell you, things are kind of sucky for me business-wise. The name is toxic." And we chatted a little more. And as I was leaving, goes, it reminds me of The Godfather. Never say our name is toxic. So, it was like, well, it wasn't me saying it. It was people saying it to me.
Well, it is. Yeah, I mean, that is. I've in my prior life, as a political consultant, I did a lot of work on the outside with developers and whatnot, and the name was kind of toxic.
Yeah, it was. I was telling that story the other day of how I built more buildings and more square feet than anyone, and I know a lot of the old school landlords in this town, and they'd say, you know what? Let him have his fun. We know that we own 10 times more than he does. That's right. We need to play that game.
Yeah, I knew a lot of the sort of the the Vornado folks. A lot of them, it was not the same world that Donald Trump was describing over and over again. So I want to talk about two things that I found particularly egregious in the story of how Trump behaved. First off, he kind of dismantled your father's estate. He kind of stole it from you and your family. Tell us a little bit about how that happened and what happened with that.
When my son William was born, a day into it, he had started having massive seizures, literally hundreds of seizures a day. And he was at Mount Sinai Hospital, where I was born, interestingly enough, and my other two children, Andrea and Christopher. And he was there for 3 weeks, and not once did any of my aunts or uncles come see him or even call. They didn't even call to see how he was doing. When we finally, after 7 weeks in hospital, 3 different hospitals, we brought William home. And about 2 weeks later, we received a notice from Donald's attorney basically saying, you're out. You're out of your grandfather's inheritance. And the troubling part of that is, beside the fact that it happened, is that Donald was my trustee. After my father passed away in 1981, Donald was named as my trustee, which I take to mean he's protecting me. He's protecting me and my family.
Right.
And he did the exact opposite. This is when he was on the balls of his ass financially. He was on an allowance from the banks. And this was one of the ways out he could get the money. So that's how that all came about.
Reading that, it's again, there's that succession vibe in the family story there. So I do want to talk about, you mentioned your son, William, who was born with severe health problems with a genetic issue that caused him to have severe health problems.
KCNQ2.
Right. HCNQ2. It's the potassium channel deletion in
and this will make Donald happy. It's not a genetic. It's not found in anyone's genes. It's not Lisa's
right. It's
fault.
just it's a roll of the dice.
It's a 1 in a billion or whatever.
Right. A literal random mutation that occurs for unknown. So William required enormous care and support.
Yes.
Which you guys, had to work hard to provide, had to struggle to provide after they had cut you out of the family, after they had done these things. But when he's elected president, you, in trying to help not just William, but families who are going through the same story of supporting a child with profound disabilities.
Yes.
You decided you would take a chance and ask to see if you could do something at the federal level. After all, your uncle's the president. You've cordial relationships with him.
Yeah.
And when you contacted Ivanka to do this, she was pretty receptive and said, "You're going to meet with Ben Carson and Alex Azar. You're going to, have all these meetings, and these folks are going to, pay attention to this." And you meet with your uncle. Tell us the story about how this meeting proceeds, because I think this is something that it really lights up a space of what I think of as the moral vacuum inside of Donald.
Yeah, I brought down about 10 advocates who were just brilliant people, brilliant. And again, we worked through from Carson Azar to several different groups within the government. It was good, and they made some good headway. And I reached out to Donald and said, "Look, I really would like to bring these people. I want you to meet these people." So we had a pre-meeting in the cabinet room. Then we were ushered. Funny enough, again, in the throes, May of 2020, we all remember what that was like.
Yeah, not a fun time.
No, it was not fun. As soon as we left the cabinet room, we had to take our masks off.
Right.
And you've heard the stories of how many people got COVID during it. But we did, as President of the United States. We walk in and we're in there for about 45 minutes. And I joke later that to these people who are not just brilliant, but just very nice people, I said, "My guess is you never thought you'd hear the F-bomb thrown out that many times in short amount of time. But we dispersed after 45 minutes, as I said, and Donald called me back. He greets me with his old, "Hey, pal, how's it going?" We sat down, and he goes, "You know those people, the expenses, they should just die." And I sort of sat back and, how do you respond to that?
Right.
And it was, okay, thanks very much. I appreciate your help, and took off.
Well, but the strange thing is that's not the only time Trump said that to you.
No,
right?
It's a couple of years later, a fund that had been set up, and I'd like to just put this into context, and it goes back to that legal dispute that he and I had,
right?
When my inheritance was taken away from me, money that had it been distributed the way it should have, I wouldn't have even had to ask my aunts and uncles for a fund for William.
Right.
William's medical needs were such that therapies that he needs desperately aren't covered by insurance.
Right.
So I went to him and said, "Look, the fund is running dry." And this was on a phone, by the way, phone call.
Right.
And he goes, "Your son doesn't recognize you. Let him die and move down to Florida."
Jesus Christ.
I don't know how you can explain that to be said about any human being, as he espoused in the Oval Office, but to say it about your grandnephew. And again, keep in mind, he never met William. He never understood. Yeah, he has tremendous, complex disabilities, but I tell you, William has more guts than Donald does. He is the most courageous and inspirational person I've ever met. And William is the reason that I'm out there advocating on behalf of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
God bless
William
you.
inspires love. Donald kind of inspires fear.
That is something that even before I knew your story, I had other people when I was writing my first book about him who told me he does not like sickness, illness. If somebody around him gets sick, gets cancer, or has some sort of congenital problem, it becomes like somebody told me one time, you can see a wall go up.
Yeah.
And that person, he's afraid of getting, the bad luck or whatever, around him. And I'm sure more sophisticated psychological analysis than you and I could provide could figure out where that comes from. But I mean, when I read your story, I read that several times, and I was just like, let him die and move down to Florida. And there's a degree to which that is just the most self-involved, kind of callous approach to a human life that I found it really stunning, and I'm sorry for the way your family had to sort of confront that.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to go home to your wife and say, "Hey, I just got to tell you what I."
By the way, the guy that controls the money would like us to have our son die.
But good news, we may be able to move down to Florida. The
There's
next
always an upside. I mean,
I was waiting for him to say, "And by the way, I've got a house to sell you." But didn't go that far. I told him,
so
he does recognize me, and that was the end of the conversation.
Yeah, well, and that is a, and I know parents with children with disabilities, and they are the most giving and committed people, and a lot of them that I know they've never treated it like, there's a burden, there's a physical burden, there's a financial burden, but they don't think of the child as the burden. They think of the condition as the burden. They love the child. They love their children, and they'll do anything for them.
Yeah.
As all of us,
Yeah. Years ago when William was young, someone said to me, parents don't say, "Oh boy, I hope I have a child who's blind," or "Oh boy, I hope I have a child who has autism."
Right.
It happens. It happens to millions and millions. And what we need to do, and what my mission is to support those people, to give them the voice that they really don't have right now. It's got to be a national effort.
It does. It does. So, Fred, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I want to wrap up by asking you one more question. Sure. As we leave, what is one thing that you think Americans should take away from your understanding of your Uncle Donald Trump? as they go into this election cycle this year?
Let me answer it this way. As you may know, I've said I'm voting for Kamala Harris, and I will campaign on her behalf if I am asked. She's going to take this country forward and keep our democracy intact.
Yep.
I am, like many, and this is not hyperbole, I am concerned about where this country could go if Project 2025 is implemented. It's a dystopian, dangerous place to go, and
incredibly
we cannot allow that.
Incredibly. Well, I want to thank you so much, Fred, for coming on the show today. Tell folks where they can reach you on social media and anything else you want to pitch beyond the book.
Okay. Well, we're going to be starting a podcast up, and hopefully you'll be a guest one time. It's called All
I'd
in the
be
Family,
honored.
More to the story. And that'll be up and running soon. So that's the way. I also have, thanks to my daughter, Andrea, I'm going to give her kudos. I don't even know what Instagram means, but Andrea is. I do have an Instagram account.
Fantastic.
She's a very sassy young lady, so there's a lot of sass in there.
Listen, I have to tell you, I am a 60-year-old white dude, so I have certain understandings of social media. I'm good on Twitter. That's about as good as I get.
Well,
so the rest of it,
because you're younger than I am, so I'm.
It's the mileage, though, folks.
I've got better hair, much like I got better.
By far, folks. The book is All in the Family: The Trumps and How We Got This Way by Fred Trump. I really recommend it. I read it in 1.5 sittings. It was fascinating, and it is a really insightful book about a man and a family who have reshaped America in some pretty dangerous ways. And Fred has got some really good insights that I think everybody will value and appreciate. Thank you again for coming on the enemies list today, Fred, and we will talk to you again soon, my friend.
All right, pal. Thanks.